All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. There we go. Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? All right, so I did mine on the moon observations and how that went. I learned about NGSS standards 3D learning, specifically agricultural science, and how I can apply the cross-cutting concept of patterns to the classroom. So I use agricultural science to teach students about the cross-cutting concept of patterns. I taught my students how to observe and record the moon phases. And then we used our moon charts to analyze the patterns of the moon and determine how long a lunar cycle is. I'm going to show you some samples of student work. Oh, my screen just froze here. I'm going to stop sharing and then share it again. All right, so here's an example, or here's actually the rubric that I created for my students for the moon observations. So they could earn a check plus if they completed all 5 weeks of moon observations. And then their observations had to include the date, the time that they looked at the moon, and then a picture of the moon. And then their observations had to be neat and accurate. And then they could earn a check if they also completed all 5 observations. And then they had most of the dates written and the time and the pictures. And then most of their observations were neat and accurate. And then a check minus was for those who did not complete their 5 weeks of observations. And only some of them may have included the date, time, and picture. And then their observations may have appeared messy or inaccurate. So I'm going to show you 3 samples of student work. So here's one student who earned a check plus. As you can see in her moon observations, she did all 5 weeks. And then each observation includes the date and the time that she looked at the moon. And then I also compared her observations to my moon observations. I did it with them. And so I was able to compare their accuracy by comparing it with mine and making sure that their moon observations are showing the cycle of the moon accurately. So we didn't see the moon the second week, and then by the last week, it was looking like a full moon. So her observations are very accurate when I compared them to mine, and then very neat and easy to read. And then here's student number 2. So student number 2 also did all 5 weeks of observations, but you can see she forgot to write the time in 2 places on February 3rd and February 6th. So she has most of the times and the dates there. And her drawings for the most part are pretty neat and accurate. And then here's a sample of a student who did not complete all 5 weeks of observations. And then I also noticed that the observations weren't accurate because you can see there's a full moon on the first week and then another full moon on the second week with the moon waning in between. And so it basically shows that the lunar cycle lasts for about a week when we want to show that the cycle lasts for about 5 weeks. So I can tell that this student probably forgot to do observations, or they may have skipped a few weeks. And it also brought my attention to another thing I noticed was the date. So instead of writing the date, they just wrote the day of the week. And so that made me realize that I should be very clear in my teaching and model for them how to write the date. Make sure they include the exact date, including the year and the day of the week. And not just write the days of the week. And so that brought to my attention something that I should have been more clear on from the beginning and may have modeled for them. And then also after looking at the students' work, I usually checked their books every Friday to make sure they did their observation each week. But this student kept forgetting to bring their book back to class. It's just a lot of back and forth between bringing their books home and then back to class. So I've decided that I should tell them next time I do this to make sure they keep their books in their backpacks at all times, so that they remember to bring it home and back to school. So when they go home, they take it out, do their observation, and then they should immediately put it back in their backpack so that I can check it every Friday. So just being able to remind the students to keep it in their backpack so that I can check it in class, and then they can bring it home to do their observations, because I wasn't able to check this person's book until we finished the observations. And then I realized that they got a little bit behind and they weren't writing the dates. So just a few things this taught me about how I can be more clear about the expectations as a teacher. And then here are my discussion questions. I have two, so feel free to answer one of them. The first question I had was, when should students begin their moon cycle observations? And the reason I asked this question is, if you look at student one's work, we didn't notice the first crescent moon until the red circle here in the third week. And then we didn't notice the first full moon until the last week of observations, because we started our observations just before the new moon. And then when we were doing the lunar cycle page, we found our first crescent moon, which was the third week. And then the moon started to wane, or actually wax. And then we found the full moon in the third box in the blue circle at the last week. But then we didn't really get to observe anything in between the full moon and the new moon phase. So she left those blank, because we didn't really get to see the phases in between unless we went back to the beginning of the observation. So I just wanted your recommendations to see what you thought about when we should start the moon cycle. Maybe we should start on a full moon, on a new moon, or on a crescent moon. And then my second question is ideas for follow-up activities or assessments, maybe using Google Jamboard or Google Forms, because I really loved using those together in class. And I would love to do some sort of follow-up activity with the moon observations, maybe specifically how the moon relates to planting, with some sort of Google Jamboard or Google Forms activity.
All right, nice job, Amanda. Does anybody want to jump in on any of her discussion questions? We probably got about maybe 3 or 4 more minutes.
I think it would be neat to track the tide with the moon. I don't know what grade you teach, but the high tide and the low tide according to the moon.
I like that idea. I teach 5th grade, and I think that would be a fun something extra to add to it. Yeah.
Yeah, there is that extension question at the end of the lesson where it asks them about other activities that people, do by the moon phases and things like that. So, I mean, that could go a lot of places, I think. Did your students answer that question?
No, we didn't.
And I imagine that, and a lot of these things could be made into like a Google Forms thing. That might be neat if people made things. We could have a place to share those resources if people create them.
I just had an idea, maybe for an assessment or an activity, have them build the different phases of 1 week of a moon. So it gives them a hands-on to kind of build a full moon, and then, the waxing, the waning, something like that. I don't know, just to kind of give them a project, touch and feel kind of thing. I don't know.
Yeah, some teachers like to do the moon phases with the Oreos. Have you seen that, where you take
I was going to say that
Oreo
too.
filling and you cut it out? I don't know, in COVID times you might not be able to, but maybe after.
Just take them outside and space them out by 6 feet, right? And give them a plate and a bunch of Oreos, and they will have the best time ever, especially 5th grade. You'll be a legend, Amanda.
Unless you're a blue zone school like us.
What's a blue zone school?
No sugar whatsoever.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I've never heard of such a thing.
It's like you can't bring any birthday treats. You can't bring anything. They're really hammer you on that. So sometimes we have to be kind of sneaky.
You could do it with cucumber slices.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
These are great ideas. Thank you for sharing. I did notice there was some 3D moon model art too in the Facebook that I wanted to try next. But I love the idea of using Oreos. That would be so fun. Or some sort of 3D depiction of the moon changing phases. Great ideas. Thank you so much. And then I came up with one idea of my own. I thought they could do a Google Jamboard sorting activity, because next we're going to talk about when to plant root crops and above ground crops in relation to the moon phases. And so after we talk about that, I thought they could do like a Google Jamboard sort like we did with the composting activity, but with different types of food and when they should plant them. So these are the foods they would plant between the crescent and the full moon. And then these are the foods they would plant between the full moon and the new moon.
Awesome. All right. Okay,
Thank
let's
you,
stop.
Matt.